Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this solo video, we are heading off to Boston, where in the wee hours of January the 29th, 2022, a then 42-year-old woman named Karen Reed found her boyfriend John O'Keefe's body laying on a snowbank with no idea of how he got there. Or did she? This is a big old dun 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 video because just hours after his body was found, she would find herself with bracelets around her wrists. Adding to the intrigue is John O'Keefe being an active Boston PD officer at the time of his death. Now, the thing about this case is usually when, someone is accused of murder and they're like, I'm being framed, it's a setup! It's pretty sensible to just take those ravings and be like, yeah, sure you are. Right, yeah, the good old framing job. Except in this one, it's a little bit different. There could be some fire behind the smoke in this whole video, so you know what? Let's give it a go. So to Boston we go, or rather Canton in Norfolk County to be exact, just south of the city. Fun fact, Canton is actually the home of the headquarters of Dunkin' Donuts because Boston, it runs on Dunkin'. So, Karen Reed. 43-year-old Karen was a finance lecturer at Bentley University in Massachusetts, which is the same university she attended as a student, and also an equity analyst at Fidelity. Trying to figure out what an equity analyst actually does for a living. I gave it a bit of a go, but it's really, really boring. But you know what? It pays like over 100 grand a year, so I'll take the boring, sure. Long story short, our Karen, who I'm not short of a few bob or two, was dating. She was seeing 46-year-old John O'Keefe, Officer John O'Keefe. They'd been together for about 2 years by the time our story takes place in January 2022. But this story is still ongoing, so details are a little bit sketchy. Basically, like in everything, right? You have two sides to the story. You have the prosecution and you have the defense, both very plausible. But what no one disputes is the setup to this case, which is that on the night in question, January 28th, Karen Reed and John O'Keefe were out with friends and had visited the Waterfall Bar in downtown Canton before heading for drinks at the house of an acquaintance of John's, but they didn't really know each other that well. This after party was at 34 Fairview Road. That was the home of Brian Albert, fellow Boston cop and star of Boston's Finest.
Myrna's chosen the head of the fugitive unit, Brian Albert, to help plan the operation.
What do you anticipate we should have per?
For the houses, for the body warrants, you're gonna want at least, 6 to 8 cops.
Well, look at you. They were obviously both Brian Albert and John O'Keefe were both cops. John O'Keefe met Brian Albert that night through a woman named Jennifer McCabe. Jennifer was a longtime friend of John's, but was also Brian Albert's sister-in-law. Brian was married to a woman named Nicole, Jennifer, Nicole's sister. So that's how they all knew each other. Anyways, they weren't exactly tight, but Brian Albert being a cop, John O'Keefe being a cop, they're one of them. So out that night was John, Karen, Brian, his wife Nicole, and Jennifer and her husband Matthew, having a good time at the bar. After the bar closed, after party time. Plan was, the gang of them, they'd go back to Brian's house, have a few drinks there, and this was just after midnight. What happens next then depends kind of like on which side of the argument you come down on. And it all hinges on whether John O'Keefe walked through the door of Brian Albert's home. Some people say he did, some people say he didn't, because hours later at 6 a.m, John O'Keefe's body was found on the snowbank outside Brian Albert's home.
Officer John O'Keefe, who was off duty, was found dead on Fairview Road yesterday morning in front of a friend's house. State police were at the scene last night investigating this. At this point, it's not clear how he died. An autopsy is set for tomorrow. O'Keefe was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. The department released a statement on the death of Officer O'Keefe, which reads in part, "John will be greatly missed by his friends and colleagues here at the Boston Police Department as we send our heartfelt condolences to his family and loved ones during this difficult time."
Karen, she'd been out that night. She was going to drop her fella John off at the house and head back herself. She swears she saw him walk through the front door of Brian Albert's home. However, Jennifer McCabe and Brian Albert swear he never entered the house. They had been calling and texting him to no response. Hours later then, Karen, she was looking for him. She went back. His body was found. He was dead, blunt force injury, traumatic injury. Now let's get into the two sides of this twisted story. Let's start with what the state claims. The state's narrative goes like this. Karen and John argued after a night out drinking, and when he got out of the car to go into a party at a fellow officer's house, Karen, she lost it. She reversed her SUV, hitting John O'Keefe, killing him, striking him into the snowbank. His body then lay there until it was found hours later. They also allege she was drunk at the time, which she denies. Two Canton police officers, Saraf and Mulaney, they arrived at the address just after 6 a.m. and there they found 3 women. Apparently when the officers arrived, 2 of the women were trying to give John O'Keefe CPR to no avail. The police found him cold to the touch and not breathing. Karen now was originally charged with manslaughter that she'd hit him with the car and killed him maybe in an accident or in a drunken rage or something like that. Something which she might have actually believed at the time, but we'll get back to that.
Karen Reed pleaded not guilty on charges connected to his death. During a court appearance, prosecutors say the couple had been out drinking the night before, saying when Reed found her boyfriend in the snow the following day, she questioned whether she'd hit him with her car.
The charges were then upped 4 months later to the murder charges she faces today. She was arraigned where she entered a plea of not guilty. Now, the most damning evidence for the prosecution is Karen's own words. That night, after she had dropped John off, she went home, hadn't heard from him, was going back. She was on the phone to Jennifer McCabe and she was saying something like, I could have hit him, maybe I hit him. Karen claimed she was in shock at the time and she was just trying to work out what could have happened to John. Also, when she arrived back at the house, Karen was the first person to find his body, which, they say, oh, well, you must have already known where he was because nobody else could find him. She described the moment of finding him, that John's eyes were swollen shut and blood was coming out of his nose. Not only did she raise the question of hitting John with the car, but apparently when officers arrived, she repeatedly said to the paramedics at the scene, I hit him, I hit him. Once again, Karen's lawyers have said, that was just her trying to rationalize what could have actually happened to her boyfriend of 2 years, but it's not exactly a good look to admit at the scene of the crime to the thing you're now accused of doing. The prosecution have also entered into evidence chunks of the taillight from Karen's SUV, which they say, broke when she hit John O'Keefe. Now, the defense, however, have asked for that evidence to examine it themselves, but they haven't gotten it. It's another polarizing piece of evidence, with anyone in favor of the prosecution's argument saying it's evidence that Karen backed into John, right? It's an open and shut case. She was going to drop him off, drunk, fighting. She hit him, she drove off, maybe she forgot, she went back looking for him, she found him. But the defense say it's kind of implausible that she could have actually hit him outside the house. Well, first of all, it was like a 3-point turn she was doing. The broken taillight on Karen's car was on the right side. But if she was doing a 3-point turn and she hit John, she should have broken the left taillight. Second of all, the speed she would have had to have been going at to kill him wouldn't have been possible. Then there's those injuries again. Karen said John's eyes were swollen shut and his nose bloodied, which doesn't sound too much like someone who'd been backed into. In fact, in order to inflict those injuries, or even anything close, the car would have had to have been going quite fast, which doesn't make sense in the situation that it was in and the conditions and all that. There's also a whole bunch of conflicts of interest in this case. The officer who filed the initial charges against Karen Reed, an officer, a Trooper Proctor, is his name. He's a close family friend of Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe's. He's also the one responsible for discovering Karen's SUV having a broken taillight and then having it towed away. So that begins the questions being raised as to what actually happened. First of all, the circumstances make it unclear how she could have killed him, even though that was her own first thought. And then secondly, the people investigating this case are close friends with the other people at the scene, so therefore it would make sense to not draw the light on them, because that's the other side of the argument. It's not hard to see why so many questions are being raised, and why so many people see the evidence and the prosecution's case as a whole as being somewhat tainted. The connections between pivotal figures in the case, it was dragged to the forefront by the defense recently when they asked the judge hearing the case to recuse herself, as they believed she had a close personal connection to someone involved in the case, something the judge flat out denied before dismissing the motion to have her removed from the case. does kind of seem like everybody involved in this is in shenanigans with each other. They're all in cahoots.
Inside, prosecutor Adam Lally requested the defense team no longer speak to the media.
The hyperbole or the language that's been used on the steps of this courthouse in reference to the Commonwealth having its foot on the defendant's throat.
The defense lashing out at that.
How dare the prosecution try to prohibit defense counsel from doing our jobs? How dare they ask this court to take away our First Amendment right to free speech?
All this happened after defense attorneys had accused the judge of appearing biased against them, asking she remove herself from the case because of an internet post saying she allegedly knows potential prosecution witnesses, something she strongly denied.
And I want to make it very clear that I reject the notion that untrue and unsubstantiated rumors spread on the internet can force a judge to recuse herself from a case.
And that is why some are saying this is a giant cover-up and Karen Reid is being framed for the murder of her boyfriend, Officer John O'Keefe. Because on the surface it's open and shut. She'd been drinking, she hit him, she made statements to back up that, end of story. But then you dig a little deeper under the surface and there's so much more going on here. Let's get into that. The defense hired specialist Richard Green, who found that in the hours before John O'Keefe's body was found, at 2:27 a.m, someone used a phone belonging to Jennifer McCabe, sister-in-law of the owner of the house, Brian Albert, to search on Google, how long to die in the cold. Yikes. Yeah, that's not a good look. And according to Karen's lawyers, of course, has no innocent explanation. Unless people at the party in the house knew John was missing or injured. Because remember, Karen says she saw him walk into the house. So what could have happened in the house where John O'Keefe would end up dead outside? Adding even more fuel to the cover-up fire is that the defense have a sworn affidavit from a forensic examiner stating that not only did the seriously suspicious Google search happen, but the same witness states that several phone calls between Jennifer McCabe's phone and a phone belonging to Brian Albert were deleted, along with a screenshot of Brian Albert's contact information. The defense seems to think that Jennifer McCabe, she played a pivotal role in the cover-up of whatever really happened. The defense is even accusing Jennifer McCabe of going into, when they were looking for John, when Karen Reid went back, that she was like delaying them from finding his body.
Sergeant Albert cut his teeth as a Marine in Operation Desert Storm. He views his work back in Boston as equally important.
Karen's attorneys claimed that Brian Albert is a highly trained boxer and fighter, and has deep familial and personal ties to the Canton PD and the Massachusetts State Police. So the defense is clearly trying to, look at the people who were in the house that night.
Karen Reid herself doubling down, of course, saying she did not do this. She wants to know who did.
Said it feels we're the only ones fighting for the truth of what happened to John O'Keefe. And me and my family and my attorneys and my team have marshaled every resource to get to the truth. It just feels like no one else wants it.
Karen, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
And no, she didn't do it. No, she didn't do it. This is an innocent woman. She didn't do it.
I tried to save his life.
Yeah.
I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in his blood. I was the only one trying to save his life.
Why'd you admit to it?
She didn't admit to it. She didn't admit to anything close to that. Nothing close to that. And you should know that.
That was like 3 or 4 times she admitted to it.
No, she didn't.
That's not true.
She asked a question. She asked a question, which is very different. She didn't admit to anything.
They have said several times that police never considered anyone else a suspect, including Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe, despite them giving several incriminating statements. A witness in the area saw Karen and John in the car, but didn't hear any kind of crash, didn't hear a scream, didn't see any kind of damage to Karen's car as she drove off. And get this, John O'Keefe's Apple Health also recorded his movements that night. It showed him in the area of Brian Albert's home. It said he took multiple steps at elevation, the equivalent of climbing 3 flights of stairs. There were 3 flights of stairs in the Albert home. And if he had been hit by Karen's car before he made it into the house, and he wouldn't have taken as many steps as it showed he did. The deleted phone calls, the Google searches, by the way, that was found by the defense, not the prosecution, even though the prosecution had Jennifer McCabe's phone for a year. They just never examined it. Why would they? Sure, this is an open and shut case. Karen Reid clearly hit into him with the car. Wink. One more thing that's been brought up in the public kind of discussion about this case is the serious lack of CCTV evidence, which is something we've gotten used to in these kinds of cases with the rise of Ring doorbell footage and all that. Namely, one thing CCTV footage would clear up is whether or not Karen's taillight was broken before or after she went to Brian Halbert's house. If Karen's taillight could be proven to be broken at a time when she was not at the house, well then she clearly didn't hit him. I mean, that's one of the key pieces of evidence, is that her taillight is broken, so therefore she hit him. The defense are even claiming they've been denied footage from the library in town, which would give them an indication exactly of when her taillight was broken.
We're asking for evidence. Evidence that's material, evidence that's relevant, evidence that's salient to a third-party culpability defense.
Trooper Proctor may well be key to finding out exactly what did happen to John in the early hours of the 29th of January 2022. Another thing about the lack of CCTV footage is the house directly across from Brian Albert's. The Canton Deputy Police Chief lives there, and he has a Ring doorbell camera. He says it captured nothing, and the footage was never requested, so. Karen's own Ring doorbell, however, might provide an answer as to how the taillight came to be broken if it wasn't from hitting John. Footage from the doorbell outside the couple's home clearly shows Karen accidentally backing into John's car on the way out to search for him. It was only hours later, after Trooper Proctor had impounded Karen's car, that pieces of taillight were supposedly found at the scene. The pieces of taillight which were found at the scene weren't discovered during the initial search. It was only a search hours later that they were discovered by Trooper Proctor. And then there's the small matter of the disappearing dog. In particular, Brian Albert's German Shepherd, Chloe. At one hearing, Karen Reid's attorney showed the court images of marks on John O'Keefe's arm. The defense asserted that John was in a fight with someone in the house and claimed that these marks are evidence the victim was attacked by a dog during the fight.
Prosecutors say are from the accident, but the defense believes they're from a dog attack.
The Commonwealth has always maintained that it's road rash on his arm. No one has ever said that, but counsel for the defendant. As far as the injuries are concerned to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm and right forearm, they've always and consistently been described as abrasions caused by blunt force trauma.
They requested, DNA from the dog, but the dog has been rehomed out of state.
It's a dog. We have specific evidence. Talk about specificity. Specific evidence from one of the country's leading pathologists indicating that John O'Keefe's arm was mauled by a dog. Brian Albert's dog was a 90-pound German Shepherd. Oh, and by the way, Brian Albert made sure to get rid of that dog in the months following John O'Keefe's death, after that dog had literally been with the family for some 7 or 8 years.
They wanted more access to the house. Brian Albert sold the house. He sold the house for $50,000 less than asking, in the middle of a housing crisis, in Massachusetts. So not only was the house not really searched at the time, now it can't be searched.
Brian Albert is integrally involved in the death of John O'Keefe. He is implicated in the death of John O'Keefe. Jennifer McCabe is equally implicated in the death of John O'Keefe and the subsequent cover-up of that death.
So that is the two sides to the story. One, Karen Reid backed into John and killed him. Problems with that are she probably wouldn't have been going fast enough to kill him. Definitely wouldn't have been going fast enough to hit him so that he knocked into a snowbank. And it seems like her taillight would have already been broken, which is the key indication that she did hit him. Or the second side of the story is John did go into the house, Brian Albert's house, and maybe something happened in that house, which ended up with John O'Keefe's body being dumped outside. But the problem with that is if something did happen in the house, the idea was just to dump his body outside and get lucky with a cover-up. At her bail hearing, Karen Reid's lawyers asked the judge to lower bail to $5,000, citing a whole heap of health issues they say Karen has been suffering from. The various ailments include a brain tumor, multiple sclerosis, and colitis, which is you got fair play to you. The judge gave that an but Karen would be released anyway on the 2nd of February after posing $50,000 bail. This case is whack. Like I said, on the surface, it's just a simple whatever, but then you dive underneath and it seems like everybody is in cahoots. The defense says Brian Albert is a cop, something happening inside that house, and he's getting all the other cops to cover up from, as he has deep and familial ties with the state troopers and the local police department. But then on the other hand, John O'Keefe himself was a cop, so what could have happened that would, what could have happened? The prosecution says that Karen and John were fighting, that they were on the verge of breaking up. Yet Karen would say no to that, and in CCTV they looked happy on the surface at least. Reed's own team have told the media that she has already spent thousands of dollars on her own defense, because it's a fight for her life. But spending tens of thousands on her defense and hiring experts from across the globe could easily be seen as a guilty woman throwing everything she can at the wall to see if something sticks. There's a lot in this one, folks. If you want to learn more, highly recommend you check out the links below. Definitely has a deep rabbit hole. And John O'Keefe, he seemed like a great guy.
O'Keefe took on the role of raising his niece and nephew after their parents died several years ago. It was a role O'Keefe's family says changed his life.
It goes to show the person that he is. He has a huge heart. Like my family said, he would give you the shirt off his back. Just really amazing guy.
He was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. He'd taken in his young niece and nephew after their parents died, and they died just months apart. By all accounts, John O'Keefe was a stand-up guy who didn't deserve what happened to him. What happened to him is the question. The only thing he can be given now is justice. So let's see what happens in Boston. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time. I hope you found this case as interesting as I did. It's still an ongoing case, so keep on the lookout for stories for Karen Reed and what's going on there. It's a really twisted and wild one, and hopefully we'll find out the truth soon. But hey, sometimes there's no such thing as the truth. Again, here, please check out the That Chapter podcast. By the way, hadn't posted for a couple weeks because of various things going on, but it's back up now weekly, so give it a go. And yeah, that kind of wraps it up. You can find Patreon, bonus videos, all that sort of stuff in the description below, and Twitter and Instagram, and yada yada yada. Next video will be in a couple of days, so look forward to that. But until then, take care of each other and yourselves. Because I love you. Mike out.